On my own personal spiritual journey, I have experimented with many different belief systems and religions in an attempt to understand the various kernels of truth that are embedded in various ideas and concepts. Do we reincarnate? The notion of reincarnation is that when you die in your physical body, that your spirit goes into another body. And some people believe that this could be animals or other humans. Some teachings say that there's a sort of a hierarchy of beings, that you start out as something and that one life form, and then if you are able to live your life in a way that's pleasing to somebody, then you graduate to the next level of complexity. For example, like you live as a flower, and then you live as a animal, and then you live as a human. And then some teachings also have that there's also a decline, where that there's certain kinds of animals that are associated with going back down that sort of wheel. But it is worth asking ourselves the question, do we reincarnate? Because certainly there are many, many people that have had significant spiritual experiences of being in whole different places and whole different times, myself included. So let's go through some of this and see if we can put some critical analysis to this belief here, okay? So, do we reincarnate? Well, first of all, it oftentimes shows an inflated sense of self. Because if you speak to someone who believes in reincarnation, they oftentimes want to highlight that, like, oh, I was a king or a great warrior, or, you know, I was Cleopatra, or I was this person, or I was that person. And, you know, the truth is that, you know, most people in the past lived like really horrible, physically demanding, challenging, and violent and brutal lives, right? It's not really something to romanticize. And like when we get into this thing of like, oh, you know, I was this person from this time, I feel that is actually partly an inflated sense of self, or a grandiosity of our own self-importance and our own contributions to our known history. Second, there is a denial of the origin of our errors. So if a person believes in reincarnation, then it's easy for them to say like, oh, this thing that is happening to me in this life is because of something I did in a past life. And there's nothing I can do about that, right? So I just gotta accept it, okay? I feel that this is a huge denial of the truth of where our errors actually come from, which tends to be from our parents and those in our network who are very close to us when we are young. It's very painful to come to the recognition and realization that you have not been loved unconditionally by your parents as the Creator would love us unconditionally. I mean, it's so painful that we actually layer up our emotions in an attempt to avoid feeling our own pain. The third thing is there's a lack of urgency to address our errors. So another common thing you'll hear if someone believes in reincarnation is like they will explain away or justify their non-loving behavior by saying like, oh, well, I'll just get to it in my next life. Or like if there's a situation that's very challenging that they're in, or if their whole life is challenging, then they just say like, oh, well, I'm just like paying my karma for past lives and next life is going to be better. It's really a failure to recognize how the soul operation works. How about this? Like, if we live past lives, why can't we remember all of them? And not just snippets, but like, why can't we remember like every second of our life? Most people have terrible memories, and we can't even remember what we did yesterday. So, like, if we're in such a state where our memories are so weak that we can't even remember what we did yesterday? How do we think that it's loving for us, loving from the Creator's perspective, to construct a situation where we can't remember anything about our past lives? Well, what about visions? I mentioned earlier that I have had waking, sober visions of whole different times and places. Well, we'll talk about that. I feel that we do not reincarnate. Or rather, that reincarnation could potentially happen, but that's not what's going on the planet now. And that if you're in the physical world right now, this is your first life. Most likely, this is your first life. And because of that, we don't want to admit to ourselves that we're new here, or that we have been subjected to the totality of humanity's expansion and non-loving actions. It's actually more powerful for us to believe that we have been here and we have played some role in making the world the way it is, rather than dealing with our sadness about the truth of this place, that we are actually in a version of hell right now. So I have had waking, sober visions of whole different times and places. I'll tell you about them real quick. One was what I thought I was a three-fingered and three-toed purple cyclops that could levitate and generate heat by thinking and breathing. Another one I had was I was a French slave trader during the Age of Exploration, where I left France before the Revolution and traded slaves. Another was I was a Quaker boy in the Philadelphia area in the late 1700s, where I was molested by a Quaker pastor, told my parents about it, and then the pastor lied and my parents believed the pastor. And then the final one was where I was a Sumerian priest practicing dark magic. Well, I asked the Creator, did I do those things? And what I came up with was no. So, if I didn't live in those times and places, and this is my first incarnation in my first life, then where did the visions come from? Well, there's an explanation for that. Each of these visions came from spirit people who have lived on the earth at some point in time and remain bound on the earth plane. They exist here in the spirit. We can't see them, or rather, most of us can't see them, but they're there. Now, why do they hook into us? Well, it has to do with our corresponding emotional injuries. This gets back to the law of attraction, and it's important to understand how the soul operates. Our soul will attract events for us to get us to feel out our emotions on any particular topic. Now, we think this only happens in the physical world. So I use the example of getting cut off in traffic a lot. If you're driving and someone cuts you off and you experience anger, you're not actually angry at the person who cut you off. You are expressing anger. Theoretically, this would be the healthy way. That you would be expressing anger in a general way over your addiction that other people meet your expectations of how to drive. So, if you attract visions that are coming from spirits, the feeling about why they are hooking into you is pertinent to your own emotional state. And this is why it is useful to not ignore this stuff, but to face it head on and understand it with eyes open. So, if these spirit people can hook into your emotional injuries, You have the ability to feel aspects of them, just like they have the ability to share energy with you and enjoy some of the aspects about the physical world that they do not have access to in the spirit world. So let's talk about this. So let's talk about the first one, the purple cyclops, right? The purple cyclops, the feeling that I had was loneliness and sad to be a human because of what humans do to this place and how they act towards each other. And that, like, I would rather identify with a non-humanoid in a totally different body, an alien if you like, rather than face my own sadness that I myself am a human. Another one, French slave trader. Well, what is the emotions that the French slave trader and I share that I have yet to work out? Well, it's that my life is more valuable than others, and that I will justify my profession that it hurts other people because, hey, I need to do what I need to do for me, right? I mean, you hear this kind of justifications all the time, like with people, especially people with kids, right? Hey, I gotta feed my kids, right? Like I gotta do what I need to do for my family. Well, yeah, I agree that you should take care of your family, but I disagree that you can use that as a justification to enact non-loving behavior on anyone else. In the case of the Quaker boy, he was molested by a pastor, and his parents didn't believe him. So, actually, my father, my earth father, was molested by his uncle, who was a Presbyterian minister, but he never told me. He suppressed that emotion inside of himself. And then I absorb his suppressed emotions. Because remember, that's how it works. The parents pass on their suppressed emotions to their children, right? Now, I was never molested in the physical world, but because the charge wasn't strong enough to attract that event in the physical world, but we can attract all kinds of events in the spirit world. Similar thing with the Sumerian priests, right? The Sumerian priest practiced dark magic. And for a short period of time during my spiritual journey and diving into various metaphysical topics, I myself experimented with practicing dark magic for a brief period before I realized that it was empty and shallow and totally useless. And totally, any kind of energy that you can get with practicing dark magic, totally pales in comparison to receiving the Creator's love. It's just not even, they're just not even on the same scale. So, that being said, yes, there are spirit people out there everywhere, and their ability to hook into you and make you think that they are part of you is dependent upon the various emotional injuries inside of you. Now, the problem with having this belief of reincarnation is we start to believe these are our identities. And then we come to like them. And oftentimes people will interact with them. They are not us. They are totally separate beings. And we should recognize that. Sometimes, if these beings are overcloaking you and manipulating you in a variety of ways, you actually start to believe that you are them. And then when you work through your various emotional injuries, that what will happen is you fix or heal a various emotional injury, and then this spirit can no longer connect with you. Which sounds great, but what if you've got a tremendous amount of attachment to these particular stories? What if you define yourself by your beliefs about reincarnation? Well, then you've probably got a lot of sadness to feel out in these areas. But I would encourage you to do that. And again, everything I'm saying here, if you establish a relationship with the Creator, you can ask her yourself. Lay in bed and be humble and quiet and sober. and ask God, God, have I reincarnated? Or is this my first life?